Hi everybody and welcome to Project People. I'm Louise Van Laar and I'm absolutely ecstatic today to do my very first podcast in English. What a relief. Today I'm going to be talking to the man himself who's in charge of bilingual education programs for the British Council in Spain, Mark Levy, and he's been kind enough to let me interview him about the British Council project and about the way that English is taught and bilingualism is taught in Spain. I think you're going to find it really interesting and he's really nice. So I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Project People.
But bilingual education is about so much more than just language and learning. It's about thinking in a different way. It's about looking at the world in a different way. It's about opening your mind. It's about working collaboratively in the way that a lot of the work goes on in the classroom.
This is Project People, the podcast about people who inspire, create, innovate and entertain. Welcome to the show. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Project People podcast. I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome Mark Levy, who's the head of English programs for the British Council in Spain. And he manages the British Council's partnership with the Spanish Ministry of Education and 10 regional governments in the National Bilingual Educational Programme, which has been running since 1996. Now, Mark's also involved in developing the British Council's work in multilingual education in Europe. And he's also been an English teacher and a teacher educator, working with Spanish teachers of English across Spain for many, many years. He's also developed and led the British Council programmes linking policymakers, school teachers, school leaders and young people across Europe to work on successful integration in schools of children from immigrant and minority backgrounds, as well as a programme looking at how football clubs can support education in their communities. He's been involved with working with FC Barcelona and Athletic Bilbao, as well as other clubs in England. And apart from work, I know Mark likes to go to gigs. He loves music, especially seeing up and coming bands in small venues. Now, he's lucky enough to live in Madrid, so he gets to see some of these bands. And when he's not listening to music, he's usually found with a book in his hands. And his other love, I know that is, apart from family and friends, of course, is Chelsea Football Club, which I know, Mark, you've been a fan since you were 7. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. 1968. I shouldn't say that, should I? But
Oh,
that's when
goodness,
it was.
you're giving it away. Well, you know what, Mark? We've got something in common where it comes to football because my husband's a die-hard Real Zaragoza fan and he actually works in the football club. And in 1995, I don't know if you remember this,
I was
Chelsea...
there.
Oh my God, well, we were actually there ourselves. We went to see the Cup Winners' Cup, I think you say in English, isn't it? The
We
Recopa.
got hammered.
You got hammered. Do you remember the score?
It was 3-0, 3-1,
That's it.
something like that.
I actually had to call my husband and say, what was the score? I don't remember. He said, you don't remember? It was 3-0. That's right. And I remember what stuck in my mind, because I'm not a huge football fan. I mean, it's kind of been kind of instilled into me over the years, is that we were actually scared to speak in Spanish when we left the stadium, because the Chelsea fans were so pissed off with us. They were really annoyed. So we're on the train home, on the tube home. We're like, no, don't speak, don't speak, don't speak.
I remember it being a particularly nasty atmosphere, actually. It wasn't a good time for football in general and for Chelsea fans in particular. But it was, I drove all the way from Madrid. I worked that day, drove from
Wow.
Madrid, watched the game, saw us get hammered, was appalled by the violence, then got in the
Yeah,
car and drove all the way again. Very,
that's
very
right.
depressed.
Yeah, yeah,
It was
but
a long day. I do remember that for all the wrong reasons.
yeah. It's funny because the Chelsea fans do have, well, they did have, I should say, I don't know if it's still the case, that reputation. So when you said you were a Chelsea fan, I'm like, oh, I'm quite surprised he's a
We
Chelsea
thought
fan.
thug. We've got I mean, that was a period of time, I think, which was difficult for football in general and English
Hmm.
football in particular. A
Yeah.
lot of that trouble, I have to say, from where
Mm.
I was sitting, was actually caused by the police, but that's probably a different.
Yeah.
I think the reputation preceded the fans
Yeah.
a little bit,
That's
which is
right.
in no way saying that they were blameless. But I think there was an awful lot of, because when we were having a drink before the game, all the fans were mixing in all of the terrazas around the stadium, and there was
Okay.
absolutely no hassle whatsoever. And then suddenly it all kicked off somewhere. But
Wow.
luckily, those days are mostly gone
Thank God. It's funny now, but now you say the police thing. I mean, we're going off piste a bit here with
Yeah,
football. But I remember there was a line of policemen on the pitch just staring at the fans
yeah,
constantly.
yeah.
And I was thinking, what's going on? What's going on? But yeah,
Yeah.
it was a particular atmosphere.
It was, it was.
You
I don't
know.
remember that game or that day with any pleasure whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, I luckily, I was looking at it from the other side.
Absolutely.
So it was one
And
of
that
the
was the year
few.
Tarragona won it as well, wasn't it?
That's right. They were good old days because obviously
Yeah.
we've been suffering quite a bit since then. But anyway, that's
Right.
another podcast, Mark.
Another
We
podcast
could do
indeed. We'll do
another.
that another time. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to mention before we start the questions how I the first time I actually met you, Mark. Now you won't remember meeting me, but I remember meeting you because I think it was back in 2011, 2012, something like that. Um, it was a time where the bilingual program was kind of a bit up in the air with
Yeah.
some of the autonomous communities. And there are quite a few. Just for my listeners that don't know, I work in a British Council state school, if you like, well, a state school that is part of the British Council program. During those that year, we were really unsure about the future of the program, and there were lots of teachers that were really scared whether they were going to lose their job, whether the program was going to continue. And we heard that the head of the British Council was going to be the head of British Council program, bilingual program, was going to be coming to Zaragoza to talk to us. I don't know if you remember this,
Hmm.
Mark. Do
I
you ever
do, I
remember
do,
this?
I do indeed.
Well, I remember stirring up all the teachers. I go, come on, we've got to get there. We've got to all go. We've got to ask him questions. We're going to tell him what we think because, we don't know what's going to happen. So we all marched there with a list of questions and complaints for you, Mark. And to be honest with you, you immediately won us over because you stood there on the stage in front of probably 300-400 teachers, if I'm not mistaken. I'm a lot of teachers, so maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it felt like a lot of teachers who were frothing at the mouth. And you stood there in the middle on your own and you completely won us over with your niceness, your good humor, encouragement, basically putting yourself in our shoes, explaining, what you did, how you did it. And we all left that meeting in a really different mood than the one we came into. And you managed to tame all of these raging teachers. So, that's a massive compliment to you, saying that, you
Thank you
obviously
so
got
much. Yeah.
charm skills.
I think I was just extremely naive, to be honest. I didn't know what I was walking into. It was a difficult time because I'd only just taken over the role. I mean, I'd been in the council obviously for a lot longer,
Yeah,
but Teresa had left, who used to do
yeah,
used to run that team, and she'd retired. And where there'd been a team, there was now just me, which wasn't a team. And I also had other things to do. Those other projects you mentioned, I was doing those at the same time. So, we moved from being a team of sort of three, four who were just running the bilingual program with the ministry, to being me with it being sort of 5% of my job. And
yeah.
so I don't think I was really ready for.
You weren't
I
aware
just
of it.
took, I just took it as it was. I just thought, well, okay, what am I going to
Yeah,
do? I'll tell people what we're doing, what I
yeah.
want to do, and where we are. I'm not defending anything because I didn't really know I had to defend
That's right.
anything.
Well, actually, that was probably your saving grace, really. And it's funny because
Yeah.
I remember you saying, we were just this tiny team. Of course, we had the teachers in Aragon, there are quite a few bilingual schools in
Yes.
Aragon.
The
We had
biggest part
the,
of the program.
is that right?
Oh, yeah, yeah, by far and away, the biggest number of schools in the
Okay.
program are gone. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we had the feeling, well, certainly I did, that there was an army of British Council people. And then when you stood there on
Yeah.
your own and said it was just
Yeah.
me and someone
It's
else, we're
me.
like, oh, poor guy. We'll leave him alone then.
Exactly. So I think I won you over by being vulnerable and
You
pathetic.
did, you did. But over the years, I have to admit that, Mark, you've twisted my arm on more than one occasion to take part
Yes.
in things that I probably didn't feel like I should take part in, which was helping write the orientations, is that the right
Orientaciones, yeah.
word? For
Guidelines.
primary guidelines, that's right. See, I'm trying with Spanglish here coming out.
Exactly.
Also doing some webinars for teacher
Mm.
training. Certainly, I remember when you came to me and said, would you like to do this? I'm like, oh, no, no, I can't do that. I'm not good enough. I can't do that. But you really encouraged me. So I'd like to say thank you because that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And also, so when it finally came for the time for me to twist your arm to do this podcast, you really kindly agreed. So
Oh,
Thank
of
you,
course,
Mark.
delighted. Yeah, no
So
problem at
without
all.
further, yeah, sorry. So Mark, I just want to welcome you again properly now. I've given you the introduction. Welcome to Project People. Mark Levy is the head of English programs at the British Council. So welcome, Mark.
Very pleased to be here, or be nicer to be there, but pleased to be here
Yeah.
too. I'm at home.
Yeah, we have to do this online, unfortunately. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your early days,
Yeah,
Mark. How did you end up in Spain? Tell me a bit about your personal journey.
it's total chance, basically. I was finishing off at Manchester University, uh, and I was wondering what to do with my life, as often happens at the end of a
Mm,
degree.
yeah.
And I was going to do a master's in connected to South African black trade unionism. Funnily,
Wow.
these were
It's
my
random.
revolutionary years. This is when I was a student. I was involved in a whole load of sort of, left-wing
Yeah.
political sort of societies and things. And I was very, very interested in the whole situation around South Africa at the time, which was the apartheid years.
Yeah.
And I had it all organized. And on the morning, I had to go through an interview for the masters just as a procedure, just had to be
Hmm.
done. And on the morning of the interview, my flatmate said, the first thing they're going to ask you is, why do you want to do it? And I couldn't think of a reason. I was doing it because I had nothing else to do. I literally could not. I was
Yeah.
interested, but I couldn't think of a reason. So I phoned them up and I cancelled that. And then I had, oh, what am I going to do with my life now? So I ended up being sort of doing part-time jobs in London. Went back to London for a while, and then somebody told me about teaching English as a foreign language. So I did that,
Yeah.
um, and I loved it. I did one of those 4-week CELTA courses that you don't know if you ever probably not done that,
Like
but
TEFL course? Would that be like a
yeah,
TEFL
yeah.
thing? Yeah. Hmm.
And I absolutely loved it from minute one. I was also very good at it. I think because it was just fitted my personality. So
Did you speak any languages yourself other than English?
not really. A little bit
Hmm.
of what I've learned at school, a little bit of Hebrew from my family, but nothing really. And then so I did that. I loved it. And then it was a question of finding a job. And I was on my way to Nicaragua as in that whole of my, it's quite ironic now thinking about the
Yeah.
way Nicaragua has developed. But I was on the way to Nicaragua as part of my political journey.
Wow.
But I had to be in London in August and I needed some work from January. So I thought,
Mm.
oh, the best thing to do would be to go to Spain because then I can learn some Spanish. So
Yeah.
I came to Spain at the end of January in 1985.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, I'm having a good time here. So everything else sort of dropped out of the window. And here I am all those years later. I just loved it. I loved it from the minute I landed, basically.
Okay. So you
And
started
that's
off
about the language.
teaching, presumably in
So I
Spain, and
started
then
off teaching. I was
Mhm.
teaching in a variety of places. And then I taught International House. Then I went into teacher training.
Okay.
And that's when I joined the British Council. I joined the British Council as somebody who was working with Spanish teachers, training and teacher development with Spanish teachers. And that was where I started, really. And
Wow.
that was and the first thing I did in the British Council was a course which we used to run, which was called the Certificate for Overseas Teachers of English, which you probably wouldn't get away with now as a title. Um, but that's what it was called back then. And it was a
Okay.
year long, it was a brilliant course. I really just jumped in at the deep end, but it was a fantastic, it had been set up by my predecessors. I'm not claiming any credit
Hmm.
for it. But it was a wonderful course because it was a year-long course, and the teachers were dedicated enough to pay, although it was
Wow.
mainly subsidized by the state school teachers, mainly
Yeah.
subsidized by their regional governments. But they came to the British Council twice a week for 4 hours at a time. They had input sessions from us. They did peer observations. They wrote essays. They got observed by us, um, and they took an exam and they
Right.
had a year-long training course, and that was my start really.
Wow. Gosh, it's so weird how kind of life you can make a tiny decision that doesn't feel that significant
Absolutely.
and it completely changes your path. I mean, I've a lot of English people that I know that live in Spain have similar kind of
Yeah.
stories. Mine was very similar myself. I was working in a summer camp, met my partner, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I'd finished uni and wasn't really sure where to go, similar to yourself, and then just, tried the teacher thing. And yeah, here we are.
Okay. But also, I think for me, one of the bonuses, Madrid in 1985, if anybody who's listening is old enough to remember that, it
Yeah.
was quite a fun, wild place to be. I
Oh,
loved
great.
every minute of it.
Great.
Absolutely.
So you've lived in London, you've lived in Manchester, you've lived in
Yeah.
Madrid, yeah?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
part of London are you from, Mark?
I was brought up in the Cricklewood area, which I don't know if
Yeah,
you know at all.
not
And
really.
then briefly, I went to school around in Finchley, and then
Okay.
my parents lived in around Henry's Corner sort of
Yeah.
area, North London, basically all North London.
North London. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Would you go back to London now?
Only to visit.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm the same. Okay, Mark, so I'd like to ask you a little bit about your work in football clubs. What did you do in these football clubs?
Yeah. We had a couple of really good projects that came by. But one of those things, sometimes the British Council gets involved in some really, really interesting work, and occasionally, a lot of it doesn't take place in Europe. It's got to be said. A lot of it's in more developing countries, but there are a couple of things that happened, and I sort of saw them coming by, and I thought I'll have these, and both of them were sports related, football related. One we did was called Fan Ambassadors, where we were working with supporters of clubs to sort of break down the image of sort of English hooliganism and the fact that the English fans who travel are all just bad news. So what we did is we worked with clubs to take fans into schools when they came over, so that they would go in and they'd visit schools and talk
Oh,
to
wow.
kids about what was going on, around a game. So
Hmm.
we took some Chelsea fans into schools in Barcelona when Barcelona played Chelsea. We took some Liverpool fans to, I think we were in Coruña when they played Deportivo. This is going back a long time.
Wow.
And then we spoke to a couple other clubs. I can't remember, there was one more that we did. Um, I can't remember what it was
So
now.
these fans kind of went into schools and did a talk with the kids? Is that the
Yeah,
idea?
yeah. So we set it up with the local education authorities or the local football club, and then we arranged to take them into schools, and we just did that, and that was great. And another project which was based around football in the community,
Yeah.
because the UK's got a brilliant track record of clubs opening out to their communities and setting up almost like teaching environments within the club so that kids can come in and, depending on what the need is, they can do extra maths or extra or extra language work or whatever it might be. But in the environment of the club, so a lot of the materials are based around whatever the club happens to be, things around the club. So you might learn how to do things with maths, but all of your examples and stuff will be Liverpool Football Club, for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
related. And
Oh,
so
that sounds brilliant.
it was brilliant. We did that with Liverpool, with Chelsea, with Arsenal, and over here, especially with Barcelona, where we actually set up a British Council room in the Masia, where
Oh,
all the kids
wow.
are, which was fantastic. I was with a colleague of mine. We actually had a kick around with the kids, and I have no idea who was there, but in the back of my mind, I think maybe I had a kick around with Messi. He would
You
have been a
know,
kid around that time, so
oh,
it's possible. So yeah,
certainly perks of the job, I'd say. Did you
no,
get free
no,
tickets to see Barcelona or
I
anything?
did. They took me to see Barcelona and Chelsea, but since we didn't win, it wasn't such a perk.
Yeah, true. Okay, well, if it's okay with you, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the bilingual educational
Yeah, of
program
course.
in Spain, and how it started, why it started, and what were its initial aims.
Okay, well, the program started in 1996, I suppose you should say.
Hmm.
And it started when the British Council was approached by the Ministry of Education at the time because they wanted to see if we could reproduce in some way the work that was getting done at the British Council school in state schools, and offer something of a bicultural education to kids who wouldn't normally have that opportunity. So from the very beginning, the idea was to target the schools in areas with maybe a lower socioeconomic status, perhaps rural schools, areas where the parents weren't necessarily able to send their kids to extra language classes, for
Yeah.
example.
Hmm.
So the program started with 40, I'm going to get the number wrong now, 43 schools
Hmm.
uh, at early years, obviously, because as you know, the program works from early years to the end of ESO.
Yeah.
So kids come in at 3 and work their way up through primary, through early years, through primary, and then ideally into secondary, into the school, the reference school that's in the program as well, and finish
Hmm.
at 16. So we started then. We started with 43 schools, and now we have 148. There are 90 early years and primary schools and whatever the missing number, 58 secondary
Hmm.
schools.
Maybe good. And how much importance was given to like inclusivity at that time? Was that one of the main aims,
Yeah,
like you say?
absolutely. And
Hmm.
still is. I mean, the
Mm.
whole point of the program, as I said, was this idea of offering um, sort of, almost an exclusive type of education to kids who couldn't access an exclusive type of education. So this idea of bilingual, bicultural, but exclusive in the sense of, high quality, not in the sense of excluding,
Yeah.
because these are state schools. Kids go if they're local and they want to go and their parents want to send them. There's no selection process in our bilingual education program. So, kids join at 3 when they go to school and they work their way through primary. And as far as we're concerned, at least as the British Council, they then move on to the secondary school that's designated as also part of the program, and there's no selection process there either. I mean, obviously, if parents decide that they don't want their kids to continue because they have perhaps a misguided idea about how it's going to get in the way of them, going through selectivity, that's something, so many years later. But there's nothing we can do to stop that apart from information and hoping that the schools are telling their parents that, all our results from selectivity are extra positive.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a problem. So please stay in the program. But there's no selection process from our side.
No, I think that's what's lovely about it. And I know certainly when I joined the project in a school in Zaragoza, in Fernando Catolico, which was in a fairly marginal area, quite underprivileged area, I'd say, they were given really high quality language teaching. And at that time, there were 2 of us that were native speakers and the other English teachers were, really, really good. And the methodology use was lovely. So it's so nice to give to those children that, quite often don't get the creme of the creme, that give them something back, something of quality.
And I think, it is important because one of the things that, that you'll know this from all the work you do, that one of the things that we always say is that the methodology, this sort of interactive methodology, this idea of, scaffolding is basically good teaching. And people make a fuss about scaffolding. It's just good teaching. It's just helping kids through every stage of learning so they can move on to the next stage. That's all it is. It's nothing sort of particularly sort of revolutionary about it. It's doing the job. And so the fact that that's so important when you're teaching through a second language to kids who are learning through a second language. So you have to do it if you want to get anywhere. It's actually, it makes the learning accessible to all. It doesn't, the fact that it's through another language doesn't necessarily cause any sort of complication.
Yeah.
Because you're actually making learning accessible through the methodology that you're using. So it's really important that everybody gets the chance to learn in that sort of way and to learn English and to prepare for the future and living in the world we live in.
Absolutely. Okay, so the bilingual educational program emphasizes dynamic and active learning methods. Can you explain how some of these approaches differ from traditional teaching practices in Spain?
Yeah, and I think as I was just saying before, I think it's different from traditional. It's a bit difficult to talk about traditional approaches now, I suppose. But certainly when we started, there was a much more prevalence of the teacher standing at the front and talking. And there was a lot of that. I mean, there still is in a lot of places and in the UK as well, I'm sure. But I mean, there's a lot of, teachers saying, right, I'm going to do my teaching and you're going to learn in some way, shape or form. Obviously, much less at early years, but it still happens. And I think what happened with the program, as I was saying, because you have to work through another language and because we know the methodology and all the things we were talking about being interactive, scaffolding, taking the kids step by step through the process, checking and double checking and triple checking that they actually understand the concepts, because you can't rely on them understanding the Spanish because you're doing it in English and it's not their first language. So I think all of those things just make lessons more dynamic, more interactive. And then, all the things that as better than I do, because you're in that classroom all the time, is about all of the interaction between the learners as well, what they're doing together.
That's right.
Rather than just listening to the teacher, which has a value. We always say this as some kids learn in any scenario. They do. But what we're trying to do is make sure that all the kids learn. And that's the idea.
No, and I really do think it works. Okay, I'd like to ask you a little bit about how the British Council organises teacher training, because I know back in the day we'd often travel to Madrid, spend weekends there, or even a few days enjoying the training and staying in hotels, which was quite a treat for teachers. So what part does the British Council play in training teachers for the project, and how has this training changed over the years?
Yes, no, training was really, really important. I mean, it's obviously still important now, but it was massively important at the beginning. And, the ministry and the British Council put an awful lot of resources into making sure that teacher development was available to everybody who was working in the program. A lot of it went obviously on the training of the English teachers and of the people who, like yourself, who came across to sort of to lead the program, but also on the subject for the subject teachers as well, especially as we moved into secondary. And I think, one of the roles that we still have to this day, which is more challenging now because we have
Yeah.
the resources available are far fewer, but is to make sure that there's still a good level of opportunity for training, for
Mm.
development, teacher development, and to help teachers. Oops.
Yeah. That was actually one of the things I was going to ask you because at the beginning, yeah, the training was very face to face. We had to travel.
Yeah, I think because my battery just went low, and I think I might have just said "oops" at the end of
That's
that last
okay.
sentence,
Don't worry, these things
which
happen.
nobody's going to worry
No, no,
what's he
no.
referring to.
Don't worry.
Uh,
Yeah, I was just going to say that at the beginning, the training was very kind of in-house travel up to Madrid. There was obviously a significant budget for training. I suppose there were probably less teachers then to
yes.
train. And now, I mean, how has training changed over the years? How does it work now?
Well, one of the biggest changes actually happened because of the pandemic, because of the COVID pandemic, when suddenly, I mean, one of the issues around training, obviously, is not so much the cost of the trainers, it's the cost of moving teachers.
Yeah,
Because at the end of the day, the training costs are the same per hour, really,
yeah,
whether you're online or offline or whether you're face to face. Um, and moving trainers, moving an individual or two people from one place to another is not expensive. Moving 100 teachers is very
yeah,
expensive. Uh, and especially if, you can't get to and from a place in a day. So people have to stay the night. Obviously, they have to eat.
yeah,
Um, so one of the things that happened is towards just before the pandemic, everybody was struggling to work out how we would be able to reach teachers um, in a comprehensive way where there were just far less money around, basically.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and one of the things that we learned from the pandemic is that we can do things online.
yeah,
And that really was just, I mean, we could have done it beforehand, but we never did. And
yeah.
suddenly, we were offering training sessions online, and teachers from all over the program and all over the country were joining us. And it was like, well, this is a good idea. Why didn't we do this before?
Yeah, and I suppose
However,
you
it's
reach a
only,
much
oh,
much what sorry, you make reach a much wider audience, a much wider
yes.
group of teachers.
Yeah.
Although it was lovely to come up to Madrid and spend some
And
time with people.
yeah, and online training isn't the same. I mean,
Mm,
I think we're all aware. Sometimes it is the only thing possible, but actually, what we're doing at this very moment, over the last few months, and today I was sending emails about it, is trying to work out if we can run some more face-to-face training.
lovely.
Let Probably less likely to be national and more likely to be regional, so that at least the majority of teachers can come and go in the day, and
Yeah,
the number of teachers who have to stay overnight is fewer. But this is something we're talking about with our partners in the regions at the moment to see how we
great.
can do that because it's not the same. It's not the same.
No,
Uh,
it's not. It's
and also,
not.
you can't do the same amount of what, a training day, a development day with your colleagues in a room,
Mm,
5, 6 hours, where you're all
yeah.
learning from each other, interacting, is,
Mm,
a 1 hour webinar, 1.5 hour webinar. By the time you get to
yeah.
2 hours of webinar, everybody's had enough anyway, of
Yeah,
course.
that's true. Webinar for more than like an hour and a half is quite intense, isn't it? And also,
Very.
there's a lot to be said for, the post-training days, those days in Madrid, spending 6, 7 hours listening and participating, then to go for a beer with people afterwards. That's always lovely.
Absolutely. And still, even now we make sure if we do anything, there's coffee and lunch and things because
Yeah.
those are the points where a lot of the important conversations actually take place.
Yeah, that's
Always
true.
have
That is
been.
true. Yeah. I
Uh,
wanted to ask you about the progress, the change in the levels of English in Spain over the last, well, how long has it been now? More than 20 years, almost
yeah,
30
well,
years, in fact.
nearly 30, yeah.
How much of that progress do you think can be attributed to the program?
I think a lot of it can be attributed to the program because of the influence that we had on other programs. So, I mean,
Okay.
I'm not going to suggest that, that our work starting in 43 schools and reaching 148 has changed the face of English in Spain. But what did happen, definitely, was the success of our program encouraged encouraged the regional governments to look at scaling it up through their own programs. And so the fact that now every single regional government has a bilingual program, many of which
Mm.
go back, the Madrid program goes back 20 years as well, maybe more, maybe it's even 25 now. So everybody's got the opportunity, basically every child in Spain probably has the opportunity to go to a school that offers some sort of bilingual education if they
Yeah.
want to.
That's changed a lot, hasn't it? Because I know when I first moved to Spain, bilingual schools were private, 100%
Yeah,
private. If you
absolutely.
could afford it, you could afford it. And if you couldn't, you couldn't,
Yeah.
So
And I think it's
it's,
important to restate that. I'm talking and we're talking about state sector education.
yeah.
None of the work that we do is in the private sector. In fact,
Mm,
most of it isn't even in the contratado sector. It's
that's right.
it's it's the state sector,
Yeah.
and I think that is really important as a factor. And there's no. I mean, you'll know the same. The level of English in Spain when we arrived,
Yeah.
me back in 85, you in 2004, and the
Yeah.
level now, there is no comparison. I mean, people
Yeah.
talk about the fact, oh, it's not working, or the level hasn't increased. Well, just go out in the street. That's so obviously untrue.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
mean, I actually arrived in the early 90s, but didn't start working on the project till the early 2000s. But you're absolutely right. I remember I've got a really good friend that lives in Zaragoza, who I met in the private sector. So before I joined the British
yeah,
Council, I was working in a private school, and we used to love being able to talk on the bus in English, and nobody could understand us. So we could say whatever we want about anybody, and
yeah,
just
yeah.
literally, and now you just can't do that. I mean, you really can't do that. The level has changed, and I've seen it myself. Not only the sort of like majority of people have some level of English now, and some people have really good level of English, and
And
teachers have also
especially,
improved. Sorry, go
oh,
ahead.
massively, massively. And anybody who's been educated in the last 15, 20 years will notice that difference. So whether
Yeah,
they've been sort of older and they've been through school, university, and they're now teachers, or whether they're just children who've been through the learning process, if you like, as being in school, it's completely different. Two sort of examples of that. One from within our program, when we used to get it's still the bilingual program is still a major highlight of the work the British Council does in Spain. And
yeah,
when we have VIP visits from anywhere, we take people to our schools.
yeah.
It's one of the things we do. So if we get a visit, so it doesn't matter whether you're Tony Blair or the new ambassador or whatever else, we'll take somebody to our schools.
Hmm.
When we used to take people to our schools, we would phone up the head in advance. We'd ask them to choose 3 or 4 students who we could trust and who would not embarrass us about the program. And they would be the only 2 or 3 students that the VIP was allowed to talk to.
Oh
Now, when we
wow,
do, I just go to the school, I
yeah,
put the VIP, basically through the door, and I say, right, if you want, you walk around the school, I'm going to have a coffee.
yeah.
Because the level is just completely
It's
different, and we
incredible.
trust all of the schools and all of the kids to
Yeah,
to be able to engage at
yeah,
whatever
yeah.
level they can. And we don't
I,
worry about sort of finding the best students in any way, shape, or
No,
form.
because
Completely
it's
not.
so impressive. I mean, there's one thing that in Aragon that really, every time I go, just blows me away, which is the science fair that we do in
Yes,
Aragon.
incredible.
You come every
Yeah,
year,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, where groups of children from year 5, year 6, present a science experiment and their scientific method, and the level of English and science is
Yes.
absolutely astounding, and it never ceases to amaze me how it's
Yeah,
possible at
yeah.
that age to be able to be that fluent.
Absolutely. I mean, I came today, this morning, I went to, this is nothing to do with our program from the
Yeah.
Madrid regional government. I went to their global classroom celebration of the 20 years of their global classrooms program. And this is a program where the kids, it's a United Nations program where the kids take on the role of another country and they debate
Wow.
argue something in the style of the United Nations, and the winners, 10 of them, go to the United
Oh,
Nations
wow.
every year to be part of an international competition of this. And this has been running for 20 years. And in that meeting this morning, there were no longer children, there were people who were in the first cohort from whatever 20 years ago was, 2005, 2004, 2005, and kids who they do this when they're 14. So there were kids in
Yeah.
Tercero de la ESO who were doing it today. The speeches that some of the ex-alumni
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
were better than mine. because there's just no two ways about it. Last year, the Madrid team who went to the United Nations won three of the four prizes.
Incredible.
So these are all kids who went there at 14,
Mm.
debated in English, and they debate things like famine,
Wow.
the changes in education that are needed to solve problems of literacy.
Yeah.
They don't talk about sort of what's your what you had for breakfast and what's your favorite
No,
food.
no, really
And
deep
it's
thinking
incredible.
and
The
deep.
level is just really very, very impressive. And I think when people attack bilingual education, which they still do very,
Yeah.
very often, a lot of things they're often very badly informed, or
Yeah.
they're talking about issues in education in general, which are not only issues for bilingual education. So
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of the issues are fair, but they're not about bilingual education. They're about
Mm.
education.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're perfectly
Yeah.
reasonable things to talk about in terms of how to improve education, but they're not issues about bilingual education. They're
No,
issues about
no.
education in general.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm really proud of the program and the work that's done. And like I say, having been in it for so many years now, I've seen such a huge change. And the skills, the kind of CLIL style of teaching has really, really changed the way science is taught, for example,
Absolutely.
which is amazing. Do you think? I'm thinking about England now because when I was working in England, we learned French or occasionally Spanish. The level that we came out of, primary school was null and void
Yes.
for language learning virtually. I don't know if it's changed now, but in secondary school, I mean, do they ever get to
Appalling.
the level that we get the kids to? Do you know what I mean? In terms of foreign, I suppose there isn't the same need,
There
necessity.
isn't. We have talked internally about how we can share some of this learning in the UK.
Mm,
We've never really found the way to do it. We do have quite a good number of school links, and we're always looking to work with UK institutions who work with other schools in the UK to see if we can support. But the nearest thing we've got to was a time when we were looking at how we could support learning an additional language in the UK, which was closest to what we did. But even then, the situation, the context is completely different because they're really talking about, very often they're talking about sort of families who are new to the UK, and often it's adult education, not only children. It's a very different scenario. So
yeah.
we've never really found the way in, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that I think is what we have done, though. I mean, it's very interesting is that we have a lot of interest in the program and in bilingual education in general from other countries. So we're often setting
Okay.
up study visits um, for people who come from Japan, Colombia, Brazil, Vietnam, wherever it may be, who want to see how it works here in Spain. And what
Brilliant.
we normally do, because they tend to come to Madrid, is we take
Mm,
them to some Madrid schools and some
mm,
Madrid regional program schools and some of our
mm,
schools. But
mm.
there's huge interest usually from abroad.
Yeah. One of the things that always astounds me really that after all these years, Spain still dubs films and series.
Yeah, yeah,
Do you think, I mean, I think that has to have a huge impact. I know half of my family are Dutch, and when I used to go to Holland as a kid, my cousins could all speak English really well, and they didn't really learn it until later on in schools, but they just understood English really well. And admittedly, in Holland, if you don't, if you want to ever leave the country, you have to know another language. But do you think that will ever change in Spain?
Well, I think probably the need for it has gone with all the whole sort of fact that, if you're looking at anything digital, you can choose it in English if you want anyway.
Yeah,
So they put
true.
it, but, I mean, they do say, I mean, I agree with you completely. They do say that, the dubbing industry in Spain was, I don't know how big it is now, but was one of the best in the world. So, I mean, I find it very difficult on a personal level. I can't watch anything dubbed in any language.
Yeah, I'm the same.
So if I'm watching a
Mm.
Japanese film, I will watch it with subtitles. I
Yeah, yeah,
find it
yeah,
very, very, but that's probably again the way I was brought up. I understand why that's not
yeah.
necessarily the case for everybody. Um, but I think it's easy to be lazy, but I mean, you can quite easily watch any film you want that was made in English. You just need to choose the right channel
Yeah.
on your mando, basically, on your
People are
control
really
over you.
lazy. I mean, I can't convince my friends to go and see a film, my Spanish friends to go
Yeah,
and see a film
yeah,
in version or in original
yeah,
version. They're like, well, I have to be reading all the time. I'm like, don't be
yeah,
so lazy. I'm the same. I've just finished Borgen, the Danish
yes,
series. I don't know if you've seen
yes.
that in Danish.
I
You
haven't
kind
seen
of,
it,
by
no.
the end of it, you get so used to watching the subtitles, you actually think that you speak in Danish. You understand it in
Absolutely.
Danish.
That's exactly what happens. It's exactly that. But also, I always think, well, the thing that always amazes me is that I always think acting is 90% non-verbal.
Totally. Yeah.
Sorry, 90, sorry, no, I
Verbal.
got the wrong way.
Yeah, the one.
That because it wouldn't matter, would it?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so much of it, so much, well, I mean, a lot of it is non-verbal, but so much of it is absolutely, is about
Yeah.
the way they speak. And when you hear
Yeah.
somebody's different voice, you're not hearing that actor. It's like,
Oh,
how do you know?
totally.
Oh,
Like
that person's
Friends. I
using their
mean, the amount
voice.
of people that watch Friends dubbed, I'm like, you can't
No.
watch Friends dubbed. It's just not the same. It doesn't
They're not the
work.
same people.
They're not the
Uh,
same people,
anyway,
exactly.
yes, but of
Well,
course it's easy for us to say that because most of the things that we would watch would be in English anyway, so
that's
there's
true.
no effort on our part
That's
whatsoever.
true. That is very true. Where do you see bilingual education in Spain going in the future, Mark? Do you think we're going to kind of carry on this path? Do you think there'll be any major changes or developments?
It's an interesting question because there's obviously a lot of politics involved, and I don't really want to go there. But I mean, it's always had a political component. There's always been um, a for and against side. A lot of our two for and against sides, and a
Hmm.
lot of that has been party politics or more national politics. So it's hard to say where it would go. I mean, I think what we need to do is we need to make sure this is something we're trying to do in the program, is that as in everything to do with education, we raise the standards of the teaching, the learning, the outcomes constantly. We're constantly looking about how we make things better.
Yeah.
Um, because what you can't have in any, and again, this isn't about bilingual education, about education, you can't have a lot of kids who aren't benefiting from, who are going through the process, going through the years, and then coming out and not having benefited from it. So I think it's really important that we work with a lot of work with teaching, a lot of work with standards, a lot of work with, there's still lots and lots of things to do, but I think that's across the board. I mean, I don't understand the issue that people have with languages. I think, the more languages, the better. If you could speak two, why not speak two? If you can speak four, why not speak four?
Yeah.
I do understand that people worry that, especially parents worry that their kids learning through another language may prejudice what they actually come out with
Hmm.
at the end. Although the evidence shows that's not the case.
That's
Uh,
right.
you know, we haven't noticed
Mm.
major gaps or even any gaps in most cases
Yeah.
between kids who what they learn in the content areas in English or through Spanish. And the whole idea that we had from the very beginning of kids being able to take IGCSEs in their subject areas when they get to 16,
Yeah.
you know, if they can do that, then they obviously have the content levels they need at that age range.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's funny because
So,
I know our local institute, like I mentioned to you before, that one of the, like you say, criticisms that often comes up. So they're not going to know the words in Spanish. They're not going to know the content in Spanish. They're not going to they're not going to know how to say the riverbed in Spanish. I'm like, they do. And the institute always says to us when we have meetings, actually, the selectividad process is in Spanish. They're
absolutely.
tested in Spanish, biology, chemistry, physics, geography. And these kids have learned it in English and they still do better than the kids that have studied in Spanish. That's the kind of like the results that they have studied. So that's always, they learn it, they pick it up.
And also, there's so much more. I think one of the other things which people sometimes, I mean, again, obviously, understand that the way education works at the moment, you need to pass your exams, and if you don't pass your exams, you've got problems. You've got issues
Yeah.
about access, mobility, everything else. But bilingual education is about so much more than just language
Yeah.
and learning. It's about thinking in a different way. It's about looking at the world in a different way. It's about opening your mind. It's about working collaboratively in the way that a lot of the work goes on in the classroom. It's about critical thinking as well. It's about saying, oh, you know what, the way we learn that part of history from the UK, they looked at this in a completely different
Yes.
way,
Yes.
and they saw it in a different way, and that's interesting. You don't have to change your mind, but it's just
Yeah.
an interesting way of seeing the world. And I think some of the benefits of bilingual education, which are these preparing children to live in a multilingual and multicultural world, sometimes get forgotten in these arguments about whether they have exactly the same level of science knowledge at 16 as the kids who do a monolingual education. Because at the end of the day, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean, how much of what you learn when you're 16 is of any use to you
Can you
anyway?
remember anything you learned at
I can't remember
16?
anything. Really. I mean, and the minute they go on to higher education, that learning is just a baseline. What they're going to
Yeah.
learn is obviously far, far more sophisticated, far more important. And as long as they've got the baseline, it doesn't really matter if they remember one more word in English than in Spanish or one word. Who
Yeah.
really? Who
You're
cares? What does
absolutely
it
right.
matter?
Oh, that's really lovely, Mark. Thank you for all of that knowledge. Now, I wanted to ask you a couple of more personal questions, if that's
Okay,
okay.
let's see where this
So,
goes.
what are your plans for the future, Mark? What are you going to be doing in the next few years?
Well, I'll tell you, one of my plans is to retire.
Oh,
I'm retiring very soon, in fact.
oh, wow.
Um, yeah, that's I almost retired next week.
No way. Oh my God, I did not know that. You really
I
don't
did,
look old enough to retire. So obviously on
thank you
early
so much.
retirement.
Yes, no. In the end, I didn't retire. I'm not retiring next week because it was too much of a shock to my system. The fact that I could was I just my brain wouldn't take it in. After all these years, that was my last week of work. So I'm not retiring next, but I'm retiring very soon.
Wow.
Um, and so my plans involve partly not getting up in the morning unless I want to. Um,
Lovely.
a lot of, I mean, hopefully, I mean, a lot of things depend on obviously being well and having enough money to do things. But I
Yeah.
plan to be able to see a lot more gigs in cities and countries that aren't Madrid and Spain, for example. I might go and see Chelsea more often. Travel, and if I can tie traveling in with something else that I really love,
Oh,
that'll be
brilliant.
things that I do. And I fancy learning a musical instrument. All these years I've been massively into music, and I can't play anything. So
You
that's
know
one
what?
of my.
I really thought you'd be a guitar player or something. I thought you'd have
No,
that. No?
not yet, but ask me
Uh-oh.
in 3 years' time,
Ah.
maybe. Well, 3 or 30.
Well, I've got this tradition in my new
Yeah,
podcast that I'm trying to start up to ask my guests about what their top five hacks are for one
right,
particular thing. But
right,
that's about I was going to ask you about teaching, and I thought, well,
right.
we've talked enough about
We've
teaching and
talked about
learning.
teaching. Right.
So I'm going to do desert island disc style question for you.
Okay,
Is that
let's see.
okay? So for our
It is,
listeners
although
that
I probably won't answer you very well, but go on.
our listeners that don't know what desert island discs are, it's I think Radio 4 program, yeah, BBC
Yeah,
Radio
I think
4,
so.
where they
Yeah.
ask different guests about what things they would take with them to a desert island. Okay, so I've decided to ask you, Mark, for five things that you would take to a desert
Okay.
island. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is what book would you take with you?
I I'm not a great one for rereading books. So I
Okay.
read a lot and I love reading, and I've read some absolutely wonderful literature for, in a lot of, translated obviously, but a lot of
Mhm.
different languages.
Yeah.
Um, but I wouldn't take a novel because
Oh,
I don't think that I would reread it, and I think that'll be
okay.
a struggle. So
But
I think what I would take, I'd take maybe something like a historical atlas. So something that an atlas, so of, which also, I love history. I read a lot of history and I did history at university with politics and I love history. So I think I might take something like historic, so I could spend hours just looking at, what happened in this particular century or this particular year and why did that start, and look at it on a map. I think I'd probably find that something that I would refer to much more
no
often
novel.
than I'm going to read that book again. Um,
Okay, that's
yeah,
fair enough. Do you have
yeah.
any favorite? I mean, it's really difficult to choose a favorite book. So maybe a book that you've read in the last year that you've enjoyed as a recommendation.
Oh, there's too many, I think. I'll tell you what I'm
Yeah.
reading at the moment, if it's any help. I'm
Yeah.
reading the third in the Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall trilogy. So I'm reading The Mirror and the Light, which is the
Okay.
third of that. And I love the series. And it's quite interesting because I heard recently that she took about 8 years to write the third one because having followed the life of Thomas Cromwell all the way through, she didn't want to see him die because at the end, obviously, he gets executed by Henry
Yeah.
VIII. And I've
Yeah.
had exactly the same problem. I've actually stopped this because I've got to the point where he's just falling out of favor and I don't want to
Yeah.
see him die. I don't know reading that. So it's quite good, but they're wonderful. The trilogy is amazing, and
Brilliant,
I will
brilliant.
eventually
I
finish
think
them.
I
But
read the first one that was recommended to me by
all
my
four.
brother, and I
Yeah,
didn't get any further for some reason because I tend to read various books at the same time. So if one kind of takes my
right.
favorite. Okay, the next thing I'm going to ask you, I was going to ask you for one album, but because I know you're such a
Yeah,
music fan, I'm going to let you have two albums of your
yeah.
favorite music to take with you.
Right. This is like asking me to choose which is my favorite child. And neither of them would be happy if I actually made that choice on air. Can you imagine? Not that I have one, of course. Um, uh, I think, okay, I'm going to take, this is really tough. I'll take for a new, because I'm always listening to new music. So I think for a new, have something new, I'll take Fontaine's DC Romance, which is their latest album, because I do think they're probably the most interesting band in the world at the moment. I love them.
Can you
I saw
repeat the
them
name?
live. Fontaine's DC.
Okay. Fontaine's
Okay, you
DC.
don't
Yep.
look like you've heard
Not
of
heard of
them.
them.
Okay, well, have a listen to them. I think
Okay.
they're an Irish band, although one of them is mixed Irish and Spanish heritage from Madrid, so they have a lot of Madrid connection with a lot of their things. But anyway, they're fun to. And the other one I'm going to take, I've always been a bit of a soul boy, so I'm going to take Bill Withers. I think I'll take this time. I mean, if you ask me tomorrow, I'll take completely different albums, but I'll take Bill Withers, probably live at Carnegie Hall, but
Oh,
don't really
wow.
care.
That's interesting. It's funny
So,
because on my Spotify list of the things that I listened to last year the most, Bill Withers came up as one of the first ones. I'm like,
oh wow.
I wasn't even aware I was listening to Bill Withers, but it must be something that I listen to quite
Yeah.
often.
He was absolutely wonderful. There's still a part of me that thinks I should have said Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen because that's an album that's been with me forever.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've gone for the other two, so too
Okay.
late now.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna allow you to have a film or a box set series. So you can choose.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose, this is easy really, because I rarely watch box sets. I don't watch a lot of television, even things. I bet you I'm the only person on the planet who has seen every episode of Game of Thrones except the last one. I
No
didn't finish.
way.
I
Oh,
didn't finish.
Mark.
I was so I was so upset with the penultimate one. I never
Yeah.
got to the
Well, that's
last
what,
one.
yeah, the penultimate one was disappointing. You're right. But oh, you have to. You
But
have
but so
to.
I'm gonna so I am gonna say something like I think I'll say The Sopranos because I haven't
Okay.
seen it and everybody says it's absolutely brilliant and there's a
Yeah.
lot of them. So I'll
Yeah,
take
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Fantastic. Okay, you're allowed to have one luxury.
Okay, it's gonna be a musical instrument because a desert island will give me years to learn it. So I'll take a guitar.
That is great. Oh, that's brilliant, Mark. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
That's
You're a
great. I've
bit,
enjoyed it a lot.
oh, good. You're a bit of a superstar in the bilingual schools. You know that? You're our leader. So I'm so delighted that you said yes to come on and also to be my first guest in English. So thank you so much, Mark, for everything.
You're welcome. It's been a lot of fun. And
Yeah,
yes, maybe we do it again sometime. Who knows?
yeah,
Although I don't think your listeners will want to hear me twice, but if they do,
of course, of course. And if you come to Zaragoza, I'll take you to the Tubo and we'll have some beer
I will
or some
do.
wine.
Definitely. That's definitely a
When you
date.
came with Maureen last time, we had a very nice
We had a
time.
great time. Yeah,
So
exactly.
thank you so much, Mark, and
You're
happy
welcome, Louise. It's great fun.
retirement. You
We'll speak
enjoy.
before then, I hope.
Yeah,
Okay. Take
absolutely.
care.
Okay, take care. Thanks, Mark.